Hello, my name is Joseph. Some of you may know me as the son of Jacob the dreamer, or the one whose brothers sold him off into slavery. But today I'm here to share my story with you, my journey from a young boy with dreams to a powerful ruler in Egypt. My brothers and I grew up in our father's house, but even from a young age it was clear that they didn't treat me the same way as they did the others. I was the favorite of our father Jacob, and that made my brothers resentful. One day when I was just a young man, my father sent me to check on my brothers who were tending to our flock of sheep. I had no idea that this simple task would change my life forever. When I arrived, I saw my brothers talking in hushed tones. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't have guessed what they had planned for me. They grabbed me roughly, tore off my coat, and threw me into an empty well. I cried out to them, but they ignored me. As the day went on, I heard them discussing what they should do with me. They talked about killing me, but instead they decided to sell me to some traders who were passing by. I remember feeling a sense of confusion and betrayal as they pulled me out of the well and tied me up. The traders were rough and spoke a language I didn't understand. They inspected me like a piece of merchandise before leading me away, leaving my brothers behind. I'll never forget the feeling of the shackles around my hands and wrists as they locked them in place. I watched my brothers count the coins they received for selling me off. I felt like I had been discarded like a piece of garbage. I was frightened and alone, and I had no idea what my future held. As the caravan moved farther and farther away from my home, I remember thinking about my family and how much I missed them. I felt a sense of despair and wondered if I would ever see them again. Looking back on that day, I can see how it was a turning point in my life. It was the day I was stripped of everything I held dear, but it was also the beginning of a journey that would ultimately lead me to a place of power and influence in Egypt. When I first arrived at Potiphar's estate, I was exhausted and scared. I had been sold into slavery by my own brothers and didn't know what to expect. Potiphar was a tall, imposing figure, and I was intimidated by him at first. He had a sharp gaze and a stern demeanor, and I knew right away that he was not a man to be crossed. At first, I was assigned menial tasks around the estate, like cleaning and tending to the animals. But as I grew more familiar with my surroundings and proved my worth, Potiphar began to trust me with more important duties. I was put in charge of managing the household affairs and supervising the other slaves. Despite my circumstances, I tried to maintain a positive attitude and work hard at everything I did. I found solace in my faith and believed that God had a plan for me, even if I couldn't see it at the time. But then everything changed. One day, Potiphar's wife accused me of a crime I did not commit. She had been making advances towards me for some time, but I had always refused her. She became angry and spiteful, and when I rebuffed her advances again, she accused me of trying to seduce her. I was devastated. It felt like my life was over. I had already lost my family, and now I was being punished for a crime I didn't commit. I was thrown into prison, and it seemed like there was no hope. In prison, I struggled to keep my faith alive. It was difficult to see how God could have a plan for me in such a dark and lonely place, but I tried to stay positive and help those around me. I made friends with some of the other prisoners, and we tried to support each other through our hardships. It was a difficult time, but looking back, I can see how God was working in my life even then. Through my time in prison, I was able to meet the cupbearer and the baker, which would eventually lead to my release and eventual rise to power in Egypt. But in the moment, it was hard to see anything positive. I was struggling to understand why God had allowed me to be sold into slavery and falsely accused. It was only through my faith that I was able to keep going and trust that there was a bigger plan at work. But even in the darkest of times, I never lost faith in God. I continued to believe that He had a plan for me and that He would guide me through my struggles. And eventually my faith paid off. I was summoned to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. I remember the day clearly. It was early in the morning when the guards came to fetch me from the prison. They told me that I was needed to interpret a dream for the Pharaoh. I was confused and scared, but I knew that God had a plan for me. As we approached the palace, I saw the grandeur of the place and was overwhelmed by its magnificence. I was led to the throne room, and I saw the Pharaoh sitting on his throne, surrounded by his courtiers. The Pharaoh's dream was about 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 skinny cows, and 7 healthy ears of corn being devoured by 7 withered and sickly ears. Many of the Pharaoh's advisors had interpreted the dream, but none of them had given a satisfactory explanation. When I was brought before the Pharaoh to interpret his dream, I prayed to God to give me the wisdom to understand its meaning. As I listened to the Pharaoh describe his dream, the interpretation became clear to me. The 7 fat cows and 7 healthy ears of corn represented 7 years of plenty, while the 7 skinny cows and 7 withered ears of corn represented 7 years of famine that would follow. I explained this to the Pharaoh, and he was amazed at my interpretation. He asked me how I had gained such knowledge, and I told him that it was through the grace of God. He then asked me what he should do to prepare for the coming famine, and I advised him to store up grain during the years of plenty so that there would be enough to feed the people during the years of famine. The Pharaoh was so impressed with my interpretation and advice that he put me in charge of the entire kingdom's food supply. I was given the task of overseeing the storage and distribution of grain, and I was granted great authority and power in the kingdom. I knew that God had a plan for me, and I was grateful for the opportunity to serve him and the people of Egypt. I was given a new name, Zaphanath-Paneah, and was placed in charge of all of Egypt. I knew that this was all part of God's plan for me. He had taken me from the pit and the prison and placed me in the highest position in Egypt. I used my position to help others and to glorify God. And I knew that if God could use me, a lowly slave and prisoner, for his purposes, then he could use anyone. I was given a great amount of power and influence over the land. And it was during this time that my brothers came to me begging for food and help. Seeing my brothers again after all those years brought up so many old feelings and emotions. I could hardly believe they were standing before me pleading for help. They didn't recognize me, but I knew exactly who they were. My brothers told me about their father, who was still alive, and their younger brother, Benjamin, whom they had brought with them. They explained that they were in dire need of food and that their father would be devastated if anything happened to Benjamin. As I looked at them, I felt a range of emotions, anger and bitterness towards them for what they had done to me in the past, but also a sense of compassion and a desire to help them in their time of need. I knew that God had a plan for my life, and that included the reconciliation with my brothers. I forgave them for what they had done, and I showed them the love and compassion that God had shown me throughout my own trials and tribulations. Forgiveness is not always easy. It takes strength, courage, and a deep understanding of God's love and grace. But it is essential if we want to live a fulfilling and joyful life. When we hold on to anger and resentment, we only hurt ourselves. But when we choose to forgive, we open ourselves up to love, joy, and peace. So, my friends, I urge you to seek forgiveness in your own lives. Whether it's forgiving a family member, a friend, or even yourself, know that God's love and grace are always available to you. Trust in his plan and know that he is with you always. Thank you.